Lifespire is proud to present the new and improved service delivery and documentation system. Many questions and concerns that the users have raised over the past 3 years were taken into consideration in developing this program. In addition to the features you will see during this training video, the new program is compatible across all major browsers such as Internet Explorer, Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, and Safari. The research and development team of Lifespire hope that this new program will help you render improved quality of services to the individuals we serve. The application installation is going to be simple. We are supplying you with an iPad Air where you will be able to go to the App Store and you will search for Lifespire Online mobile application and hit install. We have also given the provision for you to be able to access the program from an Android device. You will be able to find the same application in the Google Play Store. Even though the devices that we are supplying to you are all iPads, in the event that you may want to access it using a personal device of yours and it is an Android device, the option is available and you will be able to access it from the Play Store. We are also providing you the option of accessing the user login is slightly different between the mobile application and the desktop application. It's a misnomer to be using a desktop app, but for the purposes of this training, I will continue to use that. The mobile app is very simple. You put in your login initials, you put your password, and you click log, and you will be able to access the program directly. Because the tablets are considered to be very highly secure devices, the chances of malware or viruses affecting a tablet is very minimal. The security features are also that we have installed is also minimal. However, for the desktop, it is a little bit more complicated. You will need to put in your login, password, and also, as you've seen these days, the captcha, the code needs to be entered. It's not case sensitive, so it could be a small or a capital T that you put in, but please make sure that you transfer the information that you see in the box above in the code box that is blank below, and then you click login. Otherwise, you will not be able to open the app on your desktop. Once you have the application opened and ready to go, before you provide the services, there are some housekeeping rules that you need to be aware of. Always make sure that your device is powered on before the individual starts therapy. You do not want to scamper for the power supply or opening the device up after the individual starts, because that'll be a waste of your time with the individual, because any time of waiting, preparing is not considered as billable service. So you cannot be providing a service and billing for that if you're still working on the device. Check for power and connectivity. Your connectivity issues have been brought to our attention in the past with the netbooks. Things probably will resolve by itself with these devices that we are providing to you, especially because of the fact that the devices do have better connectivity in most of the areas. We are using the major providers of services in the tri state area, and most of you as users in the various locations where you are from have been accessing your smartphones, and you have seen an increased uh, cell site um, presence in your location. Most of the major providers have tried to improve their cell sites, and your connection issues probably have been uh, improved or resolved. Uh, but at some locations where if you're providing services in a basement, you may still encounter some problems. If there is a possibility for you to connect to the local Wi-Fi of the place where you provide the services, by all means, please do so. That might improve your ability to provide the services without any interruption. And even though we do not have restrictions placed on the device, we recommend that you use the device for the purposes of providing services for the individuals that we serve. If in the event that you do use it for other purposes, please use it over your local personal Wi-Fi, because the data plan that Lifespire has chosen is based on the average use um, of individuals, of the users for providing services. And if there is an overage that takes place, you will be responsible for that time. Ensure that your device settings are also checked off as never on the auto lock, because if you do not go into the settings and then check it off as never, the problem is going to be you have services rendered for individual for 25 minutes and the default settings of the sleep mode for the device is 15 minutes. By the time you ended your session, you will be in a position where you will not be able to close the transaction because your device has already slept. When you start adding a transaction, I strongly recommend that you use a mobile device for adding a transaction, but your desktop can be used for the purpose of writing your notes. The reason why I say this is that sometimes when you are writing or when you're typing something, you feel more comfortable using a larger keyboard and a larger screen so that it'll be much easier on your eyes as well as on your fingers. If that is what you prefer to do, or you have the option to do so, um, come back and use your personal device that you can access on the desktop and write the notes. But for providing services, you're using the device that we are supplying to you, and that is an iPad. The adding a transaction is slightly different from the mobile app and the desktop app. In the event that you're not able to use a mobile device and you have access to a desktop because of some connectivity issue where you're providing the service, you have the option of doing so. But when you do that, once you log in, you're going to look at the bottom of the screen and you will see add new, and that's where you're going to click for you to be able to open the screen for adding a transaction. You scroll down and select the individual that you provide services for. That's the first thing that you do. Here, I want to add something. Uh, there is a possibility that you see more individuals than you are authorized to see in that particular site. The reason being, the site is linked to the individual that is receiving services. So if you're an occupational therapist providing services for 4 individuals in a Lifespire IRA, where seven individuals totally reside, if more than 3 of those individuals also receive physical therapy, you will be seeing all those 7 individuals when you scroll down the list in at that site. You make sure that you choose the individual that you provide services for. The site, the service date, and the start time, as previously done, will automatically populate. You will not be able to alter it. It is from the back end of the system, and the system timing will populate there. So please make sure that once you set it up in such a way that it follows the universal timing. And the iPads are designed in such a way that it follows automatic changes with the time zones and the timings and such. I strongly recommend that you adjust the time of the personal time management device that you use, whether it's a watch or mobile device such as your smartphone. Please make sure that the time that you have on your watch or your clock uh, matches that on the iPad. It is better not to change it on the iPad because the iPad time is going to be the real time. So change it on the device that you have on your hand. Scroll down to choose a service. So if you're an occupational therapist, you're going to choose occupational therapy and your balance is going to populate automatically. And the description, the primary insurance, the diagnostic code, the frequency, etc., automatically populates. The one new feature, which is a very good feature, that is going to be there for the new device is going to be the off-site on-site designation that is going to automatically start, and it is going to automatically populate. It used to be that you had to choose it yourself. Now it is linked to the site. You do not have to worry about whether the site where you're providing service is an on-site or an off-site. So it is an improvement on the system, which is going to alleviate some of the errors that the clinicians were making. And now the system takes care of that itself. You will also see the balance on the right side. You choose your service, and it will show up as 1 or 2 depending on the week and the frequency that is allotted per the individual. The work week for Lifespire starts on a Sunday and then ends on a Saturday night. So here is where the makeup session issues can be explained a little bit. Let's say that you provided services for an individual on Monday, and then your next scheduled visit is the following Monday because the individual receives it 1 time a week. And you know that you're not going to be in on a Monday and you want to do a makeup session. If you go in on Saturday to do a makeup session, you will not be allowed to enter the transaction because you already exhausted your balance and your frequency for that week. Because the work week starts on Sunday, ends on Saturday, you provide the services on Monday, and now you're going back on the same week Saturday, and you will not be able to do so. However, the following week, even though you were scheduled to provide services on Monday, you will be able to go in on Tuesday and add a transaction and provide that service. So that's the way the work week works. Now you're going to choose the CPT code, um, and the description, the limit, the modifier, and the expected duration upper limit are automatically populated. And this slide and the next slide is going to be very critical because there are some changes as well as there are some precautionary areas that I want to alert your attention to. You have the choice of uh, using 1 or 2 or 3 CPT codes in a transaction. For every CPT code, your limits and your duration will populate. So for something such as 97110, The 3, most probably you are limited to 2 units of service for that particular CPT code. So in the event that you're going to be using 2 units of that service, each unit has a duration, the upper limit of 15 minutes. And let's assume that for 97110 there is an upper limit of 15 minutes, and it's going to show up. For some CPT codes, there is also be um, a range, and that range is going to determine the user duration. And when I come to the next slide, I will explain that a little bit more. But please ensure that you understand the limit and the duration and the user duration, and pay special attention to what you're doing. And let's move on to the next slide to explain this better. Enter the number of units provided for that CPT chosen. So 97110, you have the option of choosing it as 2. Then you provide services for that individual for 30 minutes. You also have the option of using 97110 for therapeutic exercises for strength for 1 unit of service, and moving on to another CPT that you are allowed to use within that particular service, and move on to CPT 2. Now here is where you have to exercise caution in terms of what you're going to do here. You choose your number of units, and then you saw your upper limit duration is 15. But for this particular CPT code, the constraining minutes, if it is going to be 8 to 22, let's say that you spend only 14 minutes with the individual, and then you moved on to the next CPT code for the rest of the session. You will need to record for yourself on the transaction as to how many minutes you spend for that particular CPT code. It is a requirement for billing, and that is a user input, that is a clinician input. You move on to CPT2, and then you will do the same thing. And before you close the transaction, you need to be very, very clear in terms of the total number of user duration spent for services for that individual. Example, the total user duration when you put your end time has to be the total time that you spend for both CPT codes. So the end time minus the start time should equal your user duration. I'll explain this further. If you started your service as 9:30 and then you ended your service at 9:55, and your first CPT code you spend for 14 minutes, you spend 11 minutes for your second CPT code. It could well be a billable session because of the fact that that particular CPT code probably has the constraining minutes of 8 to 22. But you as a clinician need to know what the constraining minutes are. There are some rigid requirements for speech therapy. A 15-minute is a rigid requirement for the speech and language therapy session that you have with an individual, and there is no flexibility on that. CMS does not make any flexibility on that. There are some OT and PT codes where there is that constraining minute flexibility is. And the crosswalk that we have provided will explain what those constraining minutes are. And I will also explain something where some questions have arisen about a psychotherapy code. 90832, under CMS's guidance, under DOH guidance and OPWD guidance, is considered as a 30-minute code. But there are some specific exemptions where there is an acceptable time range of 16 to 37 minutes, clinically justified. So here is where you have to use your discretion as a clinician and your clinical judgment in terms of how you're going to use that exemption that is given in the constraining minutes. It is not actually constraining minutes, it's an exemption for using an acceptable range. So let's say that the individual could not sustain therapy for 30 minutes for a particular session. If you are able to record that on your note and the individual only spent 22 minutes, you will be able to bill for a full session for that particular code. However, if you're going to be using 22 minutes of therapy or 25 minutes of therapy for an individual continuously for 7 or 8 sessions a week, this will be questionable under CMS as to why 90832 is being used for this individual when he or she is not sitting for a full 30-minute session. So this is where the discretion needs to be applied, but the user duration needs to be placed at all times by the clinician on the transaction, and it is a requirement. The next very important thing is the G codes. The functional G code reporting requirements of Medicare um, now is a must, and more than 65% of our individuals are Medicare recipients, and we now have to bill Medicare for the services. And so for physical therapy and occupational therapy, at this point of time, we are requiring all the clinicians to report the G codes. The G code reporting requirements under CMS regulations for Medicare are at the time of evaluation of the individual, at least once every 10 visits, and then at the time of discharge. It is going to be a logistical tracking nightmare if we do this once every 10 visits, especially because of the revolving door of clinicians, um, sometimes gaps in service, and such. So we have taken a fairly controlled approach of recommending to the clinician to report the G code for the first visit of the month. The rationale that we are applying here is the individuals getting services for therapy and occupational therapy, the maximum frequency that they are approved for by Lifespire is 2 times a week. So the maximum number of weeks in a month is 5. There is always, if we report the G code in the first visit of the month, there is never going to be a possibility of missing a G code reporting requirement because the maximum number of visits per month can be 10 and not more than that. The clinicians will have to be very careful in terms of how they report the G codes, even though we recommend that it be done at the first visit of the month. There are some clinicians who have reported it for every transaction. It will be considered as not following or not doing due diligence. It is not something that should be reported at every transaction. Please have your discretion and please have your tracking mechanism that you can adopt either by carrying a card or recording it on your mobile or anything of that sort, so that you know for sure that there is an alert that comes to you that every first transaction of the month you put your G code in. Now, how do you record or report your G code? It is for functional reporting requirements. The reason is Medicare wants to know as to what the function of the individual is currently and what your expected function of the individual for following 10 visits is. Or they want to know where the individual is now and what the severity modifier for the individual now is and how much expectation of progress is there for the individual for the future. So your current status, the G8978 on mobility, is basically the same for the goal status, but the numbers change a little bit. For the goal status, it changed to 8979. It's continued to be mobility if you're working on the same goal. The severity modifier, you need to be very careful as to how you pick it. Your severity modifier for the current status example is CM, which says 80 to 100% impaired. And then your severity modifier for the gold status is CL, 60 to 80% impaired. The letters go down, the numbers go up for the current and the gold status, but for the severity modifier, they're down. If you put it as the other way around, if your current status modifier was 60 to 80% impaired, and if your gold status modifier was 80 to 100% impaired, you are going to get a rejection on this claim for not meeting the Medicare requirement of expecting reasonable progress. If the severity was 80 to 60 to 80%, and now it's going to be 80 to 100%, you're not making any progress with the individual. There may be exceptions to this rule. There may be a progressive degenerative condition of an individual that is receiving physical therapy where these numbers probably will go up, but that needs to be clinically justified, and if not, it will not be considerable claim. So you need to pay attention to how you report your G codes. You're ready to save the transaction because you've come to the close of the session. This is the first section of your documentation using the device. You enter the end time, as I said previously. Now, if your CPT1 was 14 minutes and if your CPT2 was 12 minutes and 26 minutes with the individual, and your end time and your start time, the difference between that must be the total of the CPT duration, the usage duration that you put in. So this is something that you need to ensure that you do not make a mistake with the minutes that you enter as your end time. For the desktop application, you use the save this page, click only once, and then you are able to save the transaction just the same way as you used to do before. For the mobile application, it's a little bit simpler. You just click save and then the transaction will be saved. And you will receive an alert that says that this transaction was successfully saved. Once you save the transaction, your Progress Notes tab opens up. It's your choice to do that on your mobile device or your desktop. Whether you enter that on your mobile or your desktop, you're basically doing the same thing. And once the Progress Notes tab opens up, the date, the time, the service date time, the name of the person adding the note based on the login, service setting, etc., are populated automatically. I repeat that last point. Service setting, just the same way as your rate code, used to be something that you had to choose yourself. And many times mistakes were made. We have made improvements in the system where it now gets populated from the back end of the program. You will not need to choose that. It is linked to the site, and if the individual site is changed, it will change. But at this point of time, it is going to populate automatically. You do not have to worry about it. Now, if notes time is 48 hours after the service time, because the notes time and the service time is going to populate on the, let's say that you're trying to do a progress note 48 hours after your service time, you will not be able to complete the transaction. You will see a red button at the bottom of this note that says this transaction, this progress note cannot be entered because it is beyond 48 hours. The requirement of contemporaneous note writing has been reached, and this is a time that you will not be able to complete the note. I will come to how you can still complete the note when I talk about the addendum, but I will hold that thought for the Addendum tab. You complete your progress notes uh, by entering the note, following the documentation guidelines. Skilled intervention must be evident on every note. Check spelling before saving the note. I will spend a minute on the skilled intervention. Skilled intervention simply means that the service that you provided cannot be safely and effectively administered by another person that does not hold the same credentials as you. So if you're an occupational therapist, the same service that you rendered cannot be rendered by a person that is a direct care counselor in the day program or in the residence. How does an auditor know about that? The auditor comes to know about that only because of the sophistication of the documentation that you provided on the note. Your skilled intervention must be reflecting on the note that you wrote. If you just wrote it as simple note writing or a simple process recording, it will not be considered as skilled intervention. CMS is very strict about the documentation, and their reviews these days are very strict, and clinicians must be very careful as to what is an acceptable note. There is a separate training that is going on in terms of appropriate documentation, and I hope that it'll open your eyes in terms of understanding what is billable, what is skilled intervention, how you can document it very clearly and effectively. You save the progress note by clicking save, and an alert will say that your progress note has been saved successfully. And once that happens, you know for sure that you have a note that is now ready to be reviewed. Now I'll spend some time on the Addendum tab. You've been using the Addendum tab for some time, and we recommend that this Addendum tab for more purposes than what you're currently using. Now, I spoke about the 48 hours note issue. If you did not complete the note within 48 hours, you will not be allowed to complete that progress note on the Progress Notes tab. You cannot unilaterally write an addendum for a note that you missed within 48 hours. However, there are going to be times where on the problem form you reported why you could not complete the note within 48 hours. And then your administrative supervisor and Lifespire in writing will send to you an authorization to complete the note if your justification was accepted. At that point of time, you cannot write or you should not write the note on a paper. You should use the Addendum tab to complete the note. So that's one area where you're going to be using the tab. But again, a precaution or a word of caution, you should not use that Addendum tab for that purpose of completing a note that you did not complete within 48 hours unilaterally. You need to get an approval from Lifespire before doing so. There are other times where you will be using the addendum. After you completed the note, you realize that there was an issue with something that you wrote. You want to add a little bit more of the skilled intervention, or you want to make a correction. This is a time for you to use the addendum tab to complete that. Sometimes your clinical supervisor may review your note and will let you know that it did not pass the requirements of a skilled intervention note. And he or she will ask you to beef up or improve the, the area where you wrote your intervention. That's the time that you will be able to use the addendum tab. Sometimes, even after the clinical supervisor reviewed the note and then send it over to Lifespire for review, the Lifespire note reviewers may find something that was missing on the note. And in writing, they will inform the vendor, the contractor, or you directly about the need for writing an addendum. You will be able to and write the addendum at that point of time. Always a clinician should inform the clinical supervisor, if supervised by a clinical supervisor, about completing an addendum so that it can be reviewed in a timely manner. Your clinical supervisors are required to review notes once every 5 days, but they are only looking for a note. They're not looking for an addendum. If you wrote addenda, then you will need to them using your methods of communication with your clinical supervisor. That could be via text, via email, via telephone call, but that is between you and your clinical supervisor. But that information needs to be passed on so that the addendum can be reviewed and approved. Unless an addendum is reviewed and approved, it is not going to be considered as a note that can be closed out. Clinical supervisors, as I said, are expected to log in and check notes within 5 days of note completion. So they will log in once every 5 days or even sooner than that, and they will check for finding transactions that need review. And once they click on the finding transaction needing review, they will get a screen that has a listing of all those transactions that need review. In order to open under the rate code column, next to the rate code, there is an icon of a pen, and they will need to click on that icon to open that transaction completely. If the transaction does have all the elements that are required, then the clinical supervisor can click approved, and the note will be considered as approved by the clinical supervisor with a digital signature of the supervisor and the date when it was reviewed. If the clinical supervisor feels that the note did not meet the requirements of skilled intervention and documentation, do not click approve. Inform the clinician to add more documentation in the Addendum tab. And once the clinician informs the supervisor that that task has been accomplished, go back on the complete the progress note section approval process and complete the Addendum tab approval process, and then the note will be considered as ready to be reviewed and closed out by the Lifespire note reviewers. I discussed the skilled intervention previously, but before I close this discussion, I will um, outline that one more time. Every note, every time that you provide services, you need to define progress. If there is no progress, you have to explain why there is no progress. Defining the treating diagnosis or the reason for skill therapy and the specific functional skill lost, if any, they are also part of your regular documentation process. You need to establish the frequency and the duration of the skill services provided were medically necessary. In this brave new world of Medicaid managed care and the fine line between Medicare and Medicaid now becoming less and less visible because Medicare is now starting to pay for seemingly services that were not billed, not paid by them previously, especially after the Jimmo versus Sibelius ruling. We need to be careful in terms of how we establish medical for the services. Establish if the goals and services are realistic and achievable. If progress is not evident, then you need to revise your goals because they may not be achievable for the individual. Indicate if treatment should be modified or discontinued if a lack of progress is documented. Always work on functional, measurable, and time frame goals. Include the objective measures and establish a baseline and to measure progress. These are essential elements of note writing that is approved by Medicaid and Medicare. And as I said previously, they're looking every note, they're looking at every bill with a fine-tooth comb. And if we are not able to establish medical necessity by way of documenting it brilliantly, then the chances of us not being paid for the services is very high in this day and age. So we have to be much more careful with regards to our documentation that we used to be in the past. That brings me to the conclusion of the discussion. Our address for our administrative offices is 184-10 Jamaica Avenue, 5th floor, Hollis, New York 11423. Our contact help is Mr. Terrence Jones, who is a quality assurance specialist. His email is tjones@lifespire.org, and the phone number is 718-454-6940. Our offices are open 5 days a week, except on holidays, Monday through Friday between 8:45 and 4:45. If you are not able to reach him during the work time, please leave a message and he will get back to you. Our programmers are standing by to make any restitutions on the issues that we find after we launch the application. There may be some initial teething troubles. We will overcome them. We have put this in testing environment for the past 6 months, and all the possible issues that could crop up have been identified and been rectified. But in the event that problems do crop up, please bring them to our attention as quickly as possible so that appropriate restitutions can be made. Once again, I wish you good luck with this new service delivery system, and I hope that this will improve the quality of the services that are rendered. Thank you.